For episode 10, in the case of Minx of the Stinger, she's about to have a near death experience. So the story begins at the electronic trade show. Of course, everyone is there, including Jerka and Rio. And there's Jerka now. She's trying out a synthesizer for the first time. Then the woman at the booth had just told Jerka that the synthesizer was one of the best, state of the art to be exact. Well, don't tell me about it, Jerka says. Tell Rio. He is a genius after all, and she's not kidding. So Jerka told Rio, I'll go check out the electronic computers and be right back. So she kisses him on the cheek and then heads off. So later, Minx of the Stingers was trying out a synthesizer too. Of course, let's not forget the Stingers are at the electronic show too, just as Jerka and Rio did. So anyway, when Riot and Rapture show up moments later, Riot wants to know from Minx, has she found anything that she wanted yet? So Minx just told them no, and the reason being is because she said in her case it's a waste of her time. So after Minx let the Stingers kit the synthesizer, so Rapture asked Riot a question if he found anything, but Riot tells her no. Then Riot, when he says in his case he's getting bored, and then lets the girls know that if they found anything, they can buy it for themselves, and so he heads off. So after Riot heads off, that's when Rapture and Minx just saw Rio, and so they went to approach him. So back with Rio, he was waiting for Jerka to come back. So Rapture, however, made this suggestion to Minx of the Stingers to go say hello to him. So she asked the question of who needs him anyway. And so Rapture asked a question to Minx to say, You've given up already? Well, that kind of remark just made Minx upset and then asked the question, What do you mean by that? Well, Rapture says when it's her turn to speak in her case to state that Rio was the only guy that Minx hasn't claimed yet. So, Minx says in her case that she'll get whatever guy that she chooses, whether Rapture likes it or she doesn't. And so Minx heads off. So back with Rio, he just saw Minx of the Stingers approaching him. So the moment that Rio looked at her, you can tell that he's very annoyed with her. He says, Oh, gee, will you please go away? So Minx made a suggestion to Rio to say, if you want to get a good synthesizer, why don't you check one out over there, the one that I just left from? Then she also suggested that if he ever buys her one, then you can get a good deal out of it. And it has a good warranty on it too. So after Rio thought it over, he said, Really? You know about synthesizers? And Minx says, Well, not only do I know anything about them, as a matter of fact, I built one since I was 14. When Rio heard that, he said, Is that so? I was thinking about building one for myself. Then Minx made another suggestion to Rio to say, If you want a synthesizer that's really good, I know some chips that can do a lot better. Then Minx also suggested to make a deal with Rio. She says, If you can give me your notebook, I'll build the best synthesizer you'll ever seen. So Rio agrees, and when Minx looks at it, you can tell that she was very impressed. So Minx went ahead and did some diagrams for Rio. And when Rio looked at them, he says, Wow, well, that's very impressive. So when Jerrica shows up moments later, she saw Rio with Minx of the Stingers. And she says, Am I interrupting or something? Why, no, Rio says. And then he explains to Jerrica that Minx is just giving him some advice on synthesizers. So Minx made another suggestion. I can tell you a lot more. That is, of course, if you can take me to lunch, she suggested. Then Rio has his turn to plead his case to say, Don't get me wrong, I appreciate your tips and advice and everything, but I'm just not available right now. So he heads off with Jerica. So Rapture shows up moments later to join up with Minx to ask, How did it go? Well, Jerica just happened to show up at the last minute, Minx said. And as the two of the Stingers women head out of the trade show, that's when Minx says, Well, let's just say I impressed them just a little bit. So at the Celebrity Beach Bash later on that afternoon, that's where Lizzie Pierce, being the reporter that she is, does what she knows best. Of course, every celebrity is there. So what Lindsay did is that she wants to interview the leader of the holograms, Jim herself. Also there was Riot, the leader of the Stingers. He's also there. Anyway, while Jim was busy interviewing with Lindsay, that's when Riot, the leader of the Stingers, interrupted them. Then Riot, the leader of the Stingers, told Jim, I hope you didn't keep me waiting. For what? Jim asked, and so he was busy talking to Lindsay. Well, that was until Pizzazz of the Misfits, and let's not forget about her bandmates. They're also there at the Celebrity Beach Bash. One of the first things that Pizzazz did was to kick sand in front of Jim's face. Now you can tell that Jim was getting really annoyed with Pizzazz of the Misfits, and then she just insulted her by pleading her case to say, well, I'll leave it to you to be the brat that you are. So Pizzazz has her turn to plead her case to Jim to say, I'm here to warn you. Stay away from Riot of the Stingers. He belongs to me. So Jim traded that insult back by pleading her case to ask a question. Why? Do you have a bill of sale on you or something? So as the two women were exchanging insults to each other, Riot of the Stingers tries to break it up. But unfortunately for Riot of the Stingers, he was unsuccessful. Instead, he got pushed by the two women. So Pizzazz makes her case to say, I'm only going to tell you one last time. Out of my way. So speaking of which, we go to that song itself by the Misfits from 2 seasons ago, which I forgot to mention. It was during the entire song that the first thing that Pizzazz did was to go after Riot of the Misfits. Instead, she gets tripped by a chair. So after Pizzazz landed face first into the sand, that's when she sees a crab. And the moment she stood up, the crab just pinched her toe. So anyway, back with Jim, she was being pursued by Riot of the Stingers. So you know what she did? With a little help from Synergy, she disguised herself as a surfboard that was lining up against the lifeguard's booth. So when Pizzazz of the Misfits show up, she couldn't find Jim anywhere. Back with Riot of the Stingers, he too was looking for Jim. But when he couldn't find her, instead he was bumped into by Pizzazz of the Misfits, who had landed face first into a couple of ice cream cones. Back with Jim, she came up with another disguise, Pizzazz of the Misfits, and then Riot kissed her. Then the real Pizzazz saw what had happened. Instead, she again falls face first into the sand where, when the song came to an end, the crab just pinched her nose. So anyway, Pizzazz and Jim were about to have a conflict with each other, but Riot wouldn't allow it. So Riot, who tries to keep his ass back when she made the threat clear that she wanted to pull out Jim's hair and etc. Later, when Rio, who was also there, went to get himself something to drink, then that's when MInx of the Stinger shows up and she has a volleyball on her arm. And she says to him, I thought we could have some fun for a while. Then she suggested to Rio that they could talk about more about diagrams and etc. But Rio just brushed her off and says, You don't even fool me at least a second. Besides, why do you care so much about me anyway? As a matter of fact, in my case, I don't think you're interested. So why don't you go find someone else to play with, okay? Well, that kind of insult just made Minx upset. So Minx has her turn to plead her case to insult Rio. And anger, of course. So after that insult, that's when Minx storms off. And then she catches up to Ratcher of the Stingers, who is also there. So after Minx pleading a case to Rapture to say she wouldn't need Rio even if her life depended upon it, and decided to go swimming for a while, so she heads off. But then at the last minute, Rapture just saw a sign that the place that Minx was supposed to be swimming at was very dangerous. So Rapture tries to yell at Minx to try to warn her. So Rapture yells at Minx to say, Wait! You're not supposed to be out there! Look behind you! But by the time that Minx looked behind her, she knew that she was a second too late to do anything about it. So she was caught in the undercurrent of the wave. So back with Jim, Pizzazz, and Riot, of course, the two women were busy arguing with each other of who's getting Riot and etc. That was until Rapture of the Stingers show up to tell all three of them the bad news that Minx is in trouble and that she's drowning and that someone has to go save her right away. But all three of them, Riot, Possess, and Jim, chose to ignore Rapture. So Rapture, however, has decided to take matters in her own hands. So back with Rio all by himself with just a volleyball, that's when Rapture shows up and told him the exact same bad news that Minx is in trouble. So Rapture grabs Rio and says, "We got to hurry! You have to save her!" "Well, this better not be another attempt to have Minx have my attention," Rio says, and so both Rio and Rapture head off. So back with Minx on the Stinger, she knows that time is running out, so she tries to breathe and trying to get air while she's struggling in the water. That's until finally Rapture and Rio shows up at the last minute, and that's when Rio says, "Hold on!" And so he goes into the water to save Minx. So back with Jim, Possess, and Riot, that's when they got news from Lindsay, who shows up minutes later. So after Jim just got some news from Lindsay that there's something going on over there and that Rio is trying to save Minx at the Stingers, so she rushed to the scene. Back with Rio, who was swimming in the water, he tries desperately to find Minx, who was drowning earlier. He says, "Minx, Minx, where are you? Just hang on." And then finally he went under the water and then he successfully grabs her. So while everybody else was watching it happen, good news for Rio, he saved Minx all right and they finally made it to shore. So after Minx and Rio had made it to shore, that's the good news. And that's when Rio decides to use his life-saving skills to save her. And just when things were looking bad, that's when Minx was brought to life and she thanked Rio for saving her. So after Minx hugs Rio, the first thing she did was to plead her case to say, "I'll return the favor, I'll do anything to repay, and then I'll make amends for everything that I did, and etc." So anyway, long story short, after Minx continues to plead a case to say, "I don't care if it takes for the rest of my life, I'll make amends." And of course, Riot and Rapture helps her up. Then after that, that's when the Stingers head off. So meanwhile, at Riot's apartment, it was now time for band practice. Well, except for Minx, of course. She just wasn't interested. So when Rapture looked at her and says, "Maybe you should stay in bed today after what you just went through the other day." Then Riot, the leader of the Stingers, wants to know from Minx, "Was that a new song that you're writing over there?" "Well, not necessarily," Minx says, because she says in her case that she just made a list of people that she wants to make amends with after what he did with her when he rescued her. So Riot pleaded his case to say, "If this is another attempt for you to win over Riot's affection, you can forget it. You don't have a chance." But Minx just brushes it off to say, "Since Rio had saved me the other day, I did make a promise that I will make amends for what I did. And I'll do whatever is necessary. And I don't expect anything less." And so after that, she heads off. So after that, Rapture, who sensed that something was off, she asked Riot a question. Is she serious about making amends with everyone? And about whose pain that she's caused? So Riot brushed this off and says, "No, not Minx. Not her. Why would she want to do a thing like that? For what reason?" And then he tells Rapture, "Don't worry. If I know Minx, she'll be back to normal in no time." So meanwhile, at Starlight Music, that's Rio all by himself in his tech room. And that's when he sees Minx approaching him. So Minx approached him and says, "Am I interrupting?" "No, not at all. So what are you doing here? I'm kind of busy at the moment." "Listen, Rio," Minx says, "I meant what I said to you. Since you saved my life, I want to return the favor. Besides, I really do owe you my life." "It's really not necessary," Rio said. "I'd rather just forget about it." But at any rate, Minx then says, "Oh, by the way, I brought some diagrams for you to see." So Rio says, "Well, gee, thanks." So after Minx and Rio had sorted all the designs that Minx did, he seemed impressed. So he says, "Wow, you really did all this yourself?" That's what Rio was asking Minx. Not only did Minx says that she did, but she says, "I figured these will help a lot. As a matter of fact, they will," Rio said. Then Minx made a suggestion. She says, if you want, I can improve these designs for you. That is, of course, if it's okay with you. And so Rio agrees. So that's how it was all day long. So when Jerica shows up moments later, that's when Minx approached her. The first thing she did to say, I apologize for my behavior earlier, and I meant what I said about repaying these debts and etc. Jerica was shocked to hear that there's a sudden change in Minx that she never recognized. So Minx says, I really would like to help you. But Rio interrupted Minx and says, I hate to be rude, but I would like to speak with Jerica for a moment. And so both Rio and Jerica stepped out. While in the hallway, that's when Rio told Jerica, I know this sounds totally absurd and crazy, but I think she's really changed. Well, it's either that or it's just another con game, Jerica says when she agrees with Rio. Well, you know something else that's weird, Rio said. I think throughout the entire afternoon, and what's really weird about it is that she hasn't made a move on me all day. Then Rio continues to explain to Jerica that since he saved Minx's life at the beach the other day, she felt something that she's never had before, a near death experience, if you will. And since that's the case, that kind of experience just changed Minx for the better. After Jerica thought about what Rio said, that's when she says, okay, I'll give Minx the benefit of the doubt. I'll give her a chance. So back with Minx now all by herself, improving Rio's designs, and that's when Jerica comes in. And she says, I thought it over and we would like for you to come at Starlight Mansion. Would you like that? And so Minx agrees and says, I would like that very much. And then she hugs Jerica. So the very next day, Minx has arrived at Starlight Mansion with bags full of gifts, of course. So Jerica went ahead and let her in. Meeting with Minx were the three of the Starlight Girls, Bonnie, Dondra, and Chrissy. So as the five of them were walking to the kitchen, Minx admitted that when the Stingers were there the last time, they weren't very nice to them. So when the five of them had arrived in the kitchen, that's when Ming says, I got a surprise for the Starlight Girls. So also arriving in the kitchen were Ashley and Terry. So Minx decides to give the ray gun to Ashley. Chrissy meanwhile just thanked Minx for the chocolate chip ice cream. Next thing you know, two more Starlight Girls go into the kitchen. Jolene, who's one of Dondra's sisters, and Marianne, who's 9 years old. And then when three of the Hogwarts start coming in, which are Shayna, Asha, and Kimber, they were in shock to see that all the gifts that Minx brought for the Starlight Girls. So after Jerica told the girls of what was going on, then Jerica looked at Minx and says, let's go somewhere else quieter. And so they head off. So meanwhile in the Mansion's music room, that's when Minx of the Stingers just made a compliment on how big the room looks. And of course, with all this equipment, and very expensive to say the least. So Minx of the Stingers just made a suggestion to Jerica and her friends to have a burglar alarm right in the music room. So that way, no equipment will ever be stolen whatsoever. So Minx asked the question, what if I told you that I can get you one? But there's really no need to, Jerica said. And besides, I cannot let you do all the work. Don't be silly, Mink says. Besides, I insist anyway. And even better, I'm the one who has to do it. So after Minx left Starlight Mansion, she went right back to Riot's apartment, and by surprise, she sees the reporter talking to both Riot and Rapture. So Rapture explains to the reporter where she got the crystal ball from, and it tells her the past and the future and Riot's ancestors and etc. But Minx interrupted Rapture to tell her that's not exactly true. And then she pleads her case to tell Rapture, you know exactly where Riot's ancestors come from, and she told that to the reporter, and etc. Well, that remark just made Rapture and Riot upset. So Riot, the leader of the Stingers, told Minx, don't you dare say another word. And then he looks at the reporter and says, I'm sorry to be rude, but we'll have to finish it later. and so he escorts her out. So after the reporter was escorted out, Riot looked at Minx to say, "Enough is enough." And then he said, and I quote, that he had reached his limits on Minx doing good deeds and etc. Now Rapture has her turn to plead her case to tell Minx that because of her, the interview has been ruined. Then Minx just pleads her case to say it's the truth, honest. Also, as Wright says in his case, to tell Minx that this nonsense has to stop right this minute. So Rapture pleads her case to say since it's been practiced anyway, maybe music is just what we need right now. And so they went to the rehearsal room. But before that can happen, Minx just pleads her case to say, "I'm fine, really." So, in the rehearsal room, Rapture pleads her case to say, "If that is so, then why don't you prove it? Why don't you play something for us?" And so Minx did just that. But Rapture didn't like what she heard. She says, "No, no, no, you're doing it all wrong." Then Riot, the leader of the Stingers, wants to know, "What's wrong with you anyway?" Then Riot, the leader of the Stingers, asks Minx a question. "Are you sure you're feeling all right?" Well, we go into the entire montage with the question by the singers with the song itself. "Are you feeling all right?" So after the song came to an end, Minx apologized to her bandmates to say, "This is just the way I am right now." And just when Minx was about to leave, that's when Riot, the leader of the Stingers, pleaded his case to say, "I'm not going to tolerate this any longer. Now you bring old Minx back." Then he decided to make Minx a choice to either she does so or she'll be out of the band. Now all upset, Minx just told her bandmates that I must help Jerica and Rio, and so she heads off. So meanwhile at Starlight Music's techno room, that's when Minx told Rio the bad news. On top of that, she also told Rio what happened with the Stingers earlier, and now, according to Minx, they don't need her anymore, or at least that's what Minx thought. And since she has nowhere else that she can turn to and no one else she can talk to, now, according to Minx in her case, she's not so sure how much longer she can cope. So Rio pleaded his case to say, "No, don't take it wrong. I understand that you changed and all." Then Rio says, "I'm thankful for it, really. But don't you understand? I have my own life to live for." Well, that comment just made Minx upset. And then she told Rio, "I thought you liked me. But I suppose you don't care either." And so she runs off. So after Minx ran off, that's when Rio runs to catch up with her. When Rio met up with Jim in the elevator, she wants to know from him what's going on with Minx and why she's all upset. So Rio explains the situation to Jim to say that since the Stingers no longer need her, according to Rio, what he says in his case, Minx is trying to do something desperate. And wouldn't you know it, when both Rio and Jim made it to the rooftop of Starlight Music, Jim soon realizes that what Rio said was true. So by the time that Jim and Rio had made it to the roof, that what they saw was shocking. Minx was about to commit suicide. So Rio says, "What are you doing? Don't do that." So Minx, now upset, just tells Rio, "Give me one good reason why I shouldn't jump off of here." And then she claims her case that nobody likes her anymore. So Rio has his turn to plead his case to say, "You're wrong. I really do like you." Then Minx has her turn to ask a question. "Do you really?" Then Rio says, "Listen to me. If you can get off the roof, then we can talk about it." So after Minx was convinced otherwise, she hugs him and she says, "Thank you so much. I don't think I can go on without you. Now I have a reason to live." Now that everybody has made it downstairs, Minx is in the techno room continuing to build a synthesizer for Rio, while Rio meanwhile is outside talking to Jerica. So while in the hallway, Jerica asked Rio a question. "So what now? What are we going to do about her?" Rio said that he isn't sure, but he said that poor Minx just couldn't control her feelings anymore. He also said that she just lost confidence within herself. So Jerica, who agrees with Rio, she then says, "Well, I guess we'll just have to do something about it." So later at Starlight Mansion, both Ashley and Dondra were shooting paintballs at each other. That was until Asha comes in, and Dondra accidentally put paintballs all over Asha's sweater, and so Dondra apologized. In the meantime, Marianne and Bonnie were busy worrying gunning each other. That was until Mrs. Bailey, the housekeeper, breaks it up. Finally, Shayna and Rhea just realized that Chrissy and Terry are not feeling so well. And it's no wonder they've been sick. They've been eating junk food all day long. So, in the mention's rec room, Asha was busy washing her sweater. That's when Jerka comes in moments later, and Asha pleaded her case to say ever since Minx had arrived, this mention has been turned upside down. So Jerka has her turn to plead her case to convince Asha otherwise that Minx was only trying to be helpful. That's all. Ashley of the Starlight Girls just lets Jerka know that Minx had just returned. So after hearing this news, that's when Asha says, I would like to give Minx a piece of my mind, and so she heads off. So there's Minx installing the burglar alarm, and Asha has something to say to her. But before that can happen, Minx says, I got some good news. The burglar alarm is almost finished. After hearing the good news, that's when Jerka looked at Asha and says, What were you saying? Then Asha rephrased that statement to say, How could I be mad at Minx right now? You know something? You're right. She is trying to be helpful and nice. So, long story short, after Minx demonstrated how the alarm works and all that, that's when Jerga complimented to Minx how good of a job that Minx did. So, even though Minx appreciates it, but she says that even better, I got a surprise just for you. And so both of the women head off. So meanwhile, Jerga and Minx had arrived at the House of Glamour Shop. Now remember, that's the same House of Glamour Shop that Roxy had been to since season 2, episode 13. So long story short, Minx has a suggestion for Jerga that she needs a beauty makeover so she can catch someone else and etc. So the House of Glamour staff's crew wasted no time to do a makeover on Jerga, and then Minx pleaded her case that it'll help Jerga a lot and it'll be just the thing that she needs. So Ming says, Oh, don't worry, it'll be good as new in no time. Oh, and by the way, don't worry about the bill, I've already paid it. And so Minx heads off. So when Minx came back to the Starlight Music's tech room, she continues to work on her project. So Rio did ask her a question, shouldn't I be doing it? So Minx says, Don't worry about it, I'll handle it. Then Rio pleaded his case to say that building his synthesizer was his project and etc. Well, that comment just made me upset and said I must have done something wrong. But Rio says, No, 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 it's not that at all. You did the right thing. And he was about to say something else, but then changes his mind and says, Oh, never mind. Just keep doing what you're doing, okay? Then he says, If you need me, I'll be at Starlight Mansion. And so he heads off. So later, back at Starlight Mansion, Marianne, who was 9 years old, of the Starlight Girls, tries to open a window, but for some reason it was stuck. But by the time she finally did, she accidentally triggers the burglar alarm. So when Kimber and her friends heard the sound of the alarm, they went to the master controls in the hallway. They tried to turn off the alarm, but there's no such luck. But then Rio, who heard the alarm going off, he says, Here, let me handle it. And so he turned off the alarm, successfully, if you will. Then, when Jerka shows up minutes later, Rio looked at her and he says, What's going on with you? So Jerka explains that earlier, Minx just took her to the House of Glamour shop and they gave her a makeover. Oh, by the way, everyone else was in the living room. So when Minx comes in moments later, that's when she, by accident, overheard a conversation between Rio and the girls. Oh, by the way, she finished the synthesizer. So in the living room, that's when Jerka goes first to speak in her case to say this new and improved Minx is driving us bananas. Then Aja goes next to say, Oh, come on, Jerka, you said so yourself. She's trying to help us out, whether we like it or we don't. So Shayna goes next to say, I agree, but the problem with Minx is that she doesn't give up that easy. You know something? I think she's trying to be too helpful. So by accident, after hearing that conversation, Minx comes into the living room and asks the question, Really? You don't really need my help? Is this true? Are you sure? Did you really mean what you said about me driving you bananas? When Rio saw Minx coming in, he was in shock. He asked, "What are you doing here?" And then she said that she had some good news. She said that she finished the synthesizer and said she couldn't wait to show it to Rio. She brought it to the mansion in the living room. He said, "Really? You finished it?" So Rio says, "Wait a minute. That project wasn't mine to begin with." As a matter of fact, Rio, when he says in his case that Minx just did everything. Then Rio says, "Now don't take it wrong. I know you wanted to help, but you stole my project." Then Jericho goes next to say, "I understand you're trying to do your best and we appreciate it. But I need to know one thing. Don't you think you're doing it a little too much?" Well, speaking of which, we go to the Too Much song by the Holograms. So after the song came to an end, that's when Minx flips out and leaves the living room. And then when Rio and Jericho saw what had happened, that's when they decided to catch up with her. And then all three of them went up the stairs at the same time. So back with Minx, she makes it to the attic of Starlight Mansion. The next thing that Minx did was to open the windows, which she did. So, back with the four women, they ran outside the mansion, and when they looked up at Minx, they begged her not to do something so drastic and desperate. "Well, who needs to do that?" Minx asked. So, what she did instead is that she threw the synthesizer from below, and then the holograms moved out of the way, and by the time they did, the synthesizer broke into pieces. So when Minx comes back inside to the attic of Starlight Mansion, and when Rio and Jerka shows up, that's when she tells Rio in the anger response, Minx that is, that if you want to build yourself a synthesizer, go and get it. That is, if you can pick up the pieces, of course. So, after that, when Jerka and Rio looked out the window and down below and saw the synthesizer broken into pieces, that's when Rio says, "Wow, I guess she wasn't kidding when she said that." So when Minx goes downstairs to the living room, what she did first was to take all the toys that she has given to the Starlight Girls and threw them on the floor. So while Minx was stepping on the toys that she had once given to the Starlight Girls, that's when the rest of the girls, Shayna, Asha, Kimber, Rhea, went back inside, while Rio and Jerica went back downstairs from the attic. So when Jerica begged Minx to stop and that she was overreacting, "I'm just getting started," Minx suggested. And what Minx did is that with a paint gun, she started shooting paintballs. And when she did that, the paintballs went on Rio and Jerica. Then Minx just shot paintballs on Kimber, who was next. So Minx says, "To tell you honestly, I feel a lot better now, but I'm not finished yet." And that's when she turned around and looked behind her, she saw Shayna, Asha, and Rhea. And the next thing that Minx did, she uses the same paintball gun to paintball on Shayna, Asha, and Rhea. Then finally, after that, Minx had left the mansion. Later, at Starlight Music's tech room, that's Rio all by himself repairing the synthesizers that Minx broke. So when Jerka shows up minutes later to ask how he's coming along, "Well," Rio said when he pleaded his case, that he may be slower than Minx, but it's coming along fine. Now Jerga has her turn to plead her case to say now she feels bad for Minx. Then she says, "I thought for sure that Minx was going to change, or so she thought." Now Rio, who agrees with Jerga and says, "Well, who knows? Maybe she knows a lot better than we do, like learning to help out people or something." Later, the Stingers were busy about to be performing in their concert. Well, let's just say the good news for Riot and Rapture, they told Minx that they are glad to see that she's back to her old self again, and they were about to perform, or so they thought. That was until the lights went out. So Riot and Rapture of the Stingers went backstage to see what was going on. And that's when they learned the bad news that the fuse box blew out. And here comes a bigger problem. The electrician that was supposed to fix it is out sick. To make him feel better, that's when Rapture says, "Oh, don't worry, I'm sure Minx will fix it up." So, overhearing it, Rapture was asked by Minx, "Do you really think I could?" And Rapture said, "Sure." The reason why Rapture needed help from Minx to fix up the fuse box is because the Stingers wants to continue on with their concert. But Minx just at the last minute dismisses Rapture's suggestion to say, "Oh, I'm sorry. The word help, I don't think it's in my vocabulary." So you know what this means? The Stingers had thought to themselves that, yep, Minx is back to her old self once again. So that ends episode 10.